I think there's something really interesting in the facilitation process. Like for me, oftentimes when I'm talking to people, I'm doodling. Because for me, I know that it helps me be present and hear myself. Because when we're doodling and listening, we're actually connecting three learning centers. We're connecting visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learning. So all three of those things in your brain are lit up.
From the city of Peaky Blinders, Birmingham, England, I would like to introduce you to Paddy Danda.
As the world becomes more automated and the robots take over, it's imperative that we build the right human skills for the future. So pull up a chair, grab a samosa or two, and make yourself very uncomfortable. Dear friend, thank you so much for joining us today on the Superpower School podcast. I'm your host, Paddy Danda. And on today's episode, I have a young lady who is an artist, multi-passionate creative, and likes to make things and help others make things, which sounds very cryptic, but we're going to find out exactly what she means by this. So, Karen Light, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, I'm so excited for this conversation. Glad to be here.
And Karen, I love the books behind you. I'm always commenting on my guest backgrounds, and I think it tells us a lot about a person. That's why I blur mine out, because you'll just see a big mess behind me. But you look like you've got some super colorful books, and they look like they're diverse. So there's some kind of children's books, but I see there's a few serious ones in there. What's that all about? Tell us what's going on there.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time in virtual space, so I like to make my backgrounds reflect what I'm working on with people, which I am a book illustrator. I do a lot of children's book illustration, but also poetry books, coaching books, other ways that people want to take maybe more serious information and play with it a little bit. I also love to draw and doodle. So you'll see a lot of doodles, some of them playfully framed. You'll see a stack of my doodle books here. I love doodling in these little sketchbooks. I've been doing that for years. Yeah, so it's kind of a mix of all the things that I work on in a day with people in different ways, whether it's authors or coaching sessions or workshops. It kind of reflects what I got going on.
Oh, brilliant. And what superpower would you like to bring to this particular episode to help facilitators build deeper connections?
Okay, I'm going to bring doodling to this conversation. I was thinking about play, but I really specifically get excited about doodling. It's a modality of play, right? And I think it is one way that we can really access our creative genius and our connections to ourselves and others. So, yeah, I'm excited to share more about that.
Surely, when you see somebody doodling in class, they're not paying attention.
Ah, you just like put out my soapbox and asked me to stand on top of it. Good way to start the conversation. I taught for many years, so I'm pretty passionate about changing that narrative for kids in schools. I think it's just the opposite, and a lot of research backs me up on this. Actually, that doodle might be just the thing that's keeping that kid paying attention, engaged, not, kicking the chair of his fellow student or, wandering around in his mind, not sure what you're saying. Because when we're doodling and listening, we're actually connecting three learning centers. We're connecting visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learning. So all three of those things in your brain are lit up, and it's actually shown that that kid is more likely to retain what you're saying and pay attention. So not only should kids doodle in classes, but adults should doodle in meetings. That's another one of my passions.
Oh, that's controversial. I mean, with big corporate organizations.
I
Like,
know, but can't you visualize it? Like just see all these people in their suits, like doodling in a meeting. Does that make your heart happy? Makes mine happy.
it sure does. I actually ran a session earlier this week for a very, you could say, very traditionally tech organization. And I had some hardcore techies in the room. They'd had a whole day of talks on AI, data science, all of this technical stuff. And then they put me on around 2 o'clock, just after lunch, to, I guess, energize the group a little bit. And amazing, amazing what just that playfulness can do to an audience who you stereotypically think are just hardcore techies and they wouldn't be into it. But actually, I got some really nice comments afterwards. So I'm totally with you on this. I was just playing devil's advocate a little bit, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's it, right? Like, people just need a little permission, sometimes, or a little invitation, and most people I find are pretty ready to go. Like, they're like, "Oh, this is allowed. Woohoo. I didn't know that this is exactly what I wanted to do, but it is. It's fun, thanks." Um,
And when did you know what you wanted to do? Like, take me back to the moment where you discovered this passion for doodling.
oh, doodling? So it was, a personal story, actually. It helped me. So I was in a huge transition time in my life. I was really stuck artistically, and in that process, just felt really stuck. I was making a lot of illustrations for clients, but I lost like my own artistic voice, right? And I was somebody who's always, I paint now. I have huge paintings that I'm working on. I always create fine art alongside my illustrations. And I just couldn't seem to either start or finish anything. It was just like a graveyard of art staring at me. And I wasn't happy with anything. And I actually decided to leave. I was living in Chicago. I decided to leave, but I didn't know where I wanted to go. So I went on this long meandering road trip, basically, stayed in some different places around the States. And when I first left Chicago, I was in an emotional state because it meant a lot to me, a lot of good people, places. And I had this little like 3x5 sketchbook in my center console of my car, and I pulled it out on the side of the road, and I just doodled something. And I felt calmer. Like, it was a 5-minute thing, but I felt it calmed me down. That was the first thing I noticed. The second thing I noticed is, like, even though it wasn't a masterpiece, I started and finished something that was super satisfying. And I also, like, saw something in it that helped me. Like, it gave me a little insight or an idea. Um, and in regards to my creativity too. And so I was like, well, I'm gonna try this again. And so as I drove around, I started doing it all the time, doodling all the time. And now it's led me back to my own artistic voice. You will see the playful lines in my artwork, in my paintings, but also during the pandemic, this was right before pandemic. Um, I started integrating it into my coaching sessions. Everything's on Zoom now all of a sudden, and I was like, even though I'm doing this executive function thing, I kept feeling called to try it. And my clients loved it, and we learned, and we actually use that creativity to develop things specifically for them. So then I did some workshops, and people loved the doodle shops. It was so, it was this way of connecting, with how they were feeling. There's so much going on, right? What we're feeling internally. There's a lot going on in the world. And then also they felt like they were actually connecting with each other. And that's really what people were hungry for at that time. So I've just gone nuts ever since. I filled a lot of those sketchbooks and use it all the time in my work as well.
And so if somebody at home is sitting there thinking, hey, I'd love to incorporate doodling into the work that they do, especially around facilitation or coaching, what are some ways we can do that?
Oh, there's so many ways. I mean, do you want to play with me for a minute?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. So first thing that I like to always share with people is the difference between, or what I see as the difference between doodling and drawing, right? We all have a lot of hangups on drawing. Am I good enough? This isn't good. I don't even want to start. But I always remind people, like, you don't need to be a singer to sing or a dancer to dance, right? We just do those things, whether we feel we're good or not. And doodling is sort of the visual expression of those things. And it's just a tool that we all can use. Doodling isn't about being good at something. It isn't about how it looks. It isn't about, art even. I don't think. I think it's just expression. And we can, when we look at the doodle, we can learn to see and make meaning with it that can help us with what we're struggling with, right? So let's put you in the hot seat for just a second, Patty. What's like a little challenge you can think of that we can play with here? Maybe it's a challenge that you hear people talking about that you work with, or something that's come up for you recently that you're willing to share.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to give you a real world example of something that I've been thinking about a lot. So, with the podcast, actually, and I mentioned this very briefly to you before we started, I started this mission very much focusing on human skills across the board to help us in this crazy age of AI that we're embarking upon. And more recently, as I've been on that journey of discovery, I've been battling with, do I focus in on a aspect of human skills? And so let's maybe use that as a challenge. So, do I continue down the path that I've been on, or do I pivot and move into a new direction? That's the challenge that I've been pondering over for a while. I've come to a conclusion, but let's assume I haven't just yet.
Okay. Um, so your question could be that we're going to play with. The name of my company, my coaching and teaching company, is How Doodle, and it's a question, right? Like, how doodle I, or how doodle we? So I always like to start with a how question, because so much that we focus on is the what, but the how we get there, how we're approaching it, how we're thinking about things is really juicy, right? And something that needs to be explored further, usually. Kind of skip over it sometimes. So your question, how would we phrase it? And a good question for that. How doodle I? What rolls off your tongue? How doodle I pivot? Or how doodle I decide?
How doodle do I find my true purpose?
Ooh.
Oh, that's a deep one, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a big one. Okay. So we're gonna go and find some insights, right? You and I, we don't have, you know, a year together. We've got the one recording together, but I'm pretty confident that we'll be able to find some insights or ideas or interesting thoughts to pursue. So we're gonna start by just closing eyes for a second, taking a nice deep breath in, and feeling your body relax as you breathe out. Relaxation is really creativity's best friend. Yeah. And as you feel yourself settle there, pick up whatever you've got to draw or doodle with. And I want you to start in the middle of your piece of paper, drawing like the slowest spiral you've ever drawn. Like, you and I are in a competition to see who could draw a slower spiral. Keeping those
Okay.
lines tight.
Is it a
Really
small
feeling that
spiral or big one? Or...
you were drawing it really slow, just starting in the middle of your paper. However it starts coming out is okay for you. Letting your hand relax, feeling your arm relax, your shoulder, your stomach, making sure you're breathing. So usually I might do this for a minute or so, but I'm going to invite you now to start following your drawing utensil. Notice where it wants to take you. So we're not directing your line anymore. It's kind of taking you somewhere. Does it like to keep spiraling? If so, that's totally fine. If it starts going on other parts of your page, just follow it with curiosity. Does it want to move faster or slower? It doesn't matter. Just follow it. It could be one continuous line, or if you feel an urge to pick it up and start somewhere else, go for it. Try to figure anything out, or just letting it go, playing, seeing what happens, which is the spirit of a doodle, in my opinion. And start kind of bringing it to a close. Just find a spot where you want to end on. Okay. First of all, how is doing that for you?
That was very relaxing. And I had no idea where we were going with it. So
Right?
part of me is thinking, where's this going? Where's this going? But at the same time, I was really getting into it. And yeah, just sort of going here, there, and everywhere. Then I thought, oh, should I create a shape? And then when you said, like, just don't try and create anything in particular, then I resisted. And then it just started on flowing. So quite, quite relaxing.
So even that right there could be a really interesting conversation, like noticing where the resistance was versus how you interpreted the instruction. So that could be a really interesting conversation, right? Just the how it unfolded for you. Often brings up a lot of things to talk about. But already we have, activated your creativity just in this little doodle. So already you're calmer, your more parts of your brain are turned on. So you have more of your brain working for you as you contemplate this challenge, right? And we're playing with curiosity in a playful, relaxed way. So that really helps as well. Instead of like trying to figure it out, I got to figure this out. That becomes very narrow thinking. Right now, we're opening the thinking to my more divergent space. So now we've got this doodle in front of you. Do you mind showing me your doodle for a second?
Right, let's see.
Okay.
Pause on the camera.
Yep, I can see it. I can see it just fine. Yeah. So I love to play this game with people, which is called If This Were My Doodle. And we often play it in groups or just you and I, since we're here today, where the person holds up their doodle without saying anything about what they're thinking or seeing. And the other people say, if this were my doodle, it makes me think of this, or it reminds me of this, or it makes me feel this. And in that way, if you resonate with something, you could say, I'm going to, pursue that further. If not, you don't have to take it on because that's just their perception or their idea. Maybe it's for them what they said, right? So now we're all activating in a group space our creative thinking. So if this were my doodle, the first thing that comes to mind for me is almost like, and I don't even know why, but it feels like there's like this wave and something rocking on the wave. So it starts making me think of like a boat. But this thing that can kind of rock, which is kind of interesting thinking of the pivot thing that you said. It's almost like that spiral has become the pivot of this shape, right?
Right.
And that little spot, it'd be on your left, my right. It looks like a kidney bean to me. A little kidney bean. Yeah. I don't know. A kidney bean comes up. And on the left, some of that shape almost looks like the profile of a face with the mouth open going, "Ah," like singing or voicing something, right? So now I've just brought up a few things that I see, and you could say, oh, this is interesting, or this is not. Is anything I said sound kind of interesting to you?
Yeah, I like the sort of pivot aspect that you mentioned. It sort of goes in this direction, then it switches direction. That was kind of interesting. And I did think this was like looking like a face, even though I didn't purposely try to draw a face, but like I was looking at it even now and I was going, oh, kind of like there's an ear in there and a bit of a nose. So,
Ooh, I like the
interesting.
ear too. Yeah. And so the question starts coming up for me when I'm looking at it is like, what is it you enjoy voicing or what do you enjoy expressing? What do you hear with your inner ear? That spiral kind of feels like your inner ear or like what's within you, what you're hearing within yourself that you like to share. Do you find yourself talking about something more than other things or wanting to talk about things more than other things?
Yeah, I'm quite a deep thinker. So
Mhm.
yeah, I don't know. That could be like that inner thinking, as you mentioned. Interesting. Yeah.
Well, it brings up so something it makes me think about is, you brought up the word niching. I can't remember if it was in this conversation or before we hopped on, but that aspect of being in business, right? Like that niche and it's kind of unfolding and kind of ever elusive thing that you're always kind of changing because you're changing. Um, and to me, there is this like I always think about what could I just talk to people all day about? Like there's sort of my brain wants to come in and say, this is what your niche should be. And then there's this thing that's like, oh, but I could talk all day about this. And somehow I'm trying to smash them into each other a lot. But if I just let it be free, what is it just wants to like ramble about? I don't know. Does that percolate any interesting thoughts for you around this like true purpose question?
You are so on the ball on that, Karen. I often think of with my head anyway, this is the thing that I should be focused on. And then like I get distracted so easily because I'll read an interesting article and I'll be like, oh, you know what, that was really cool. That guy's talking about critical thinking. Maybe that could be a thing that I sort of put under my umbrella. And so my brain does just go with different directions all the time. At one point, I was thinking about presentations. I was like, oh, I could be the guy that tells people and shares with people my hints and tips on presentation. But then equally, you get involved in other stuff like great questions, right? And then I was like, oh, I love small talk. And maybe that's something I could be sharing with the world, some of those experiences. Oh, but that doesn't align with presentations. And now I've just created this other niche. Now, do I merge it? Do I keep it separate? Like all of those dilemmas often go through my mind. And the one thing that I think encompasses most of that, it's not even pure communication, because I think there's so many other things as well. And so that's where facilitation has been my kind of go-to at the moment. You never know. By the end of this conversation, it might change all over again. The direction I want to go.
Well, it's so interesting. I don't want to dominate this whole time, but like even thinking about what we said about yours, it's like, how do you teach people to hear their inner ear? So that's what they facilitate as well, right? We're getting a little meta here, but often, we're so outwardly focused when we're facilitating and so worried about how, the group is doing. And also when you're facilitating a group, that's a lot of mirrors. It's bigger than just one person. It's a group, and you're worried about how all these people are going to receive what you have to share. Um, and teaching people to be able to go within, or I don't know. I think there's something really interesting in the facilitation process. Like for me, oftentimes when I'm talking to people, I'm doodling. Because for me, I know that it helps me be present and hear myself and not get too caught up in like, oh my gosh, where's this going? Am I doing okay on this podcast interview? Is he like what I'm saying? Are we going into good? I have all that chatter going on. But if I just kind of let myself play while we talk, I hear myself and I'm present to you. And that's my inner ear. So yeah, well, we can go forever, but that gives you a little taste of how these conversations get started. And I often layer, right? Like we'll do a whole other phase or build on this, or this is just the beginning one. And now we're doing other things. We can do them as a group too. There's ways to group doodle.
So could that be an activity that a facilitator might do as a part of their workshop or meeting, just to get people in that emotional state, depending upon the type of session? I guess, if the session's about status updates, then it's probably not the right activity as if you were going to maybe do some creative work, for example.
It depends, because I think you can use it in different ways depending on what you need. So yeah, maybe you're going to have this status update. My partner has to give his status updates every Monday morning, his sales, and he could barely stay awake for it. Like it's like so boring, right? Like he just has to wait for his turn. So he has to stay awake long enough to give his thing, and then he's off again and like has to. If you're doodling while that's happening, you're more likely to actually be engaged, stay awake, hear what's going on with the rest of the company. It also is a really it's not very connective. Like if you as an organization want to build your team culture and build more connection amongst your folks, starting with a group, this could be done in 5 minutes. But you could say, hey, here's what I did. It's on my mind. Often when I start a group thing, I don't talk about the deep thing we're going into. I'm just like, do a little doodle. Feel how you feel today. And then hey, I'm Karen. I feel like this is how I am today. Good to be here, and that's that. And we're done. But we just connected with each other in a simple way and opened up our creative thinking while we're at it. I mean, what if I'm listening to you talk about your sales update and I'm like, oh my gosh, I wonder if we did this and this, then both of our sales could go up, instead of just be like, oh my God, I have to get through this. Oh my God, stay awake. I have to get through this. Stay awake.
And often when people talk about doodling, what comes to mind is that they're actually drawing something like an object or people, etc. But what I've taken away so far from this conversation is actually don't think too much about the thing you're creating. You said just let your hand wander and let it go wherever it wants, let it be free. So does that have a different impact if you do it that way?
This is a way that I find most people are willing to participate at first. The worry comes when it has to look like something they're really think about, right? Like I'm picturing this and I don't know how to draw it. I don't know how to make it look like that to you. And that creates a barrier to then getting into the doodling process. So I often start really abstract. A lot of times I'll be like, before I do anything, everybody make a scribble on your paper, hold it up. And I'm like, you're a master doodler. Oh, like just to get them break their ideas of what it means to make a visual something. But as we go about one of the things like you said, you had some resistance. You saw a shape, you wanted to make it. I encourage people not to resist what comes up. So if yours starts taking you into drawing this face and you start drawing the face, awesome. As long as it doesn't, what we just want to stay in is an open space, not worried about the outcome. We want to stay in the process. And if it means you draw a tree suddenly, it comes out of your doodle. Great. Now we're going to have to talk about the symbolism of a tree in relation to your question, right? But if it stays abstract, it's like looking at clouds, what we just did. Oh, that kind of looks like a face. Oh, that looks like a kidney bean. There's things to see that it reminds us of or makes us feel. Oh, I noticed your lines are really scratchy. Why did you use all black? Oh, that's yellow. That makes me feel happy, right? So,
Oh, I love
cool
that.
visual language.
Yeah, I love that. And do you have other favorite activities that you run when you're facilitating where doodling and visuals are part of that?
Yeah, I do. One of the things that I do a lot of work around is I work a lot with neurodiverse folks and executive function. And so I'll give you an example of how doodling could translate into that conversation. Because I think, that is something that comes up a lot just within an organization, like executive function really impacts it, whether it is how the organization is organized or not. But also everybody's different. All these people, some really might struggle with time management, right? Time management can be a really big struggle for a lot of people. And if you're neurodiverse, I have found that well, I think time's a weird thing in general, but it's especially weird. There's a reason they say time blindness and help people build time wisdom because it's just really something that feels vague and abstract to a lot of folks. So instead of, being like, you need to be we need to fix you and you need to think like a neurotypical person. I instead like to use doodling to help people embrace and understand the way their brain works better. So for me, I'm like, doodle what it feels like when it is urgent. You have put something off, you have not used your time well, you are freaking out, right? And then do a doodle of that. And I'm like, okay, do a doodle for me when you're so distracted and you're having a hard time staying on task. So it's more about the different ways we're using our time versus like staying on track. If we become more aware of how we're using our time and what that looks like for us, right? What does that look like for us? Then we're going to catch ourselves and be able to, I call it time warp back into flow. We can set ourselves up. So those doodles will give us many clues of what strategies might work or not work for them. And that's what we then go into. Does that help you give an idea of one way we might use it? There's so many ways. I have so many activities. I even
No,
have a doodle deck.
wow. If somebody wanted to boost their own doodling capabilities, are there any bits of advice you would have for them? Are there any activities that they can do just on a personal level to really kind of find that inner doodler within themselves?
One thing I ask people a lot, and I'll ask you, is there something that a shape or anything that you just could find yourself over and over again drawing or doodling? If you're like talking on the phone and you're abstract, is there anything that kind of just would come out of your pen?
I I draw these little characters now, but it's like a it's like a square but with rounded edges. So it's just the head. And
Yeah.
there's no body, they just have little legs. And I find myself just keep practice. I always practice that, even when I'm not actually drawing those little characters. I just want to get good at it because
Yeah.
drawing a square is quite easy. Drawing a circle is quite easy, but try drawing curved sort of corners and straight lines.
Yes.
It's a bit tricky. So yeah, I find myself doing a lot of those.
Yeah, and other people might say, "Oh, I love polka dots. I love making dots. I'll make a dot over and over again," or "I draw hearts over. I have this star thing." People have shown me all kinds of things that they randomly will just move their pen to do and gravitate towards. So I always share with people that, like, if you want to practice doodling, just start with repetitive shapes that you enjoy doing. So if you like making circles, make circles. You like hearts, make hearts. Just if you keep doing it over and over again, suddenly you'll start to feel an urge, right? Like it'll be like, oh, I want to overlap that. What happens if I flip the heart upside down? Why this heart? Oh, and now I'm adding it over here. Now it's becoming this like mandala thing. So it's a place to start. And that's often what people need in this process is a safe place to start. If they feel safe enough, it's, really important, actually, safety and facilitation. I'm sure that's something that you've experienced, right? Um, but it's really safety is really important in creativity as well. If we don't feel safe enough to start or be in the creative process, then we're not gonna do it. We're gonna have blocks, we're gonna have resistance. So you could start very simple. That's why I did the spiral activity with you. That's an easy place to start. People don't have a lot of resistance. Um, Sometimes I have them do a scribble and then we start filling it in, or we connect three shapes and now connect them three different ways. It's just fun.
And Karen, you're clearly very passionate about what you do. Like, what drives as a facilitator, educator? Because when we speak to somebody that is truly passionate about that thing, we just have a completely different experience. And I remember, at school, if I think back to my teachers, there's only a handful of teachers that really stand out. And those are the subjects I really enjoyed, even though I was probably not very good at them. For example, mathematics. Like, I'm terrible at maths, but we had the best maths teacher, and he just made it sort of an experience that I'll never forget. So, what about this subject that drives you and the work that you do?
I'm really passionate about people understanding that their creativity is their power. And in this age, I mean, you brought up AI earlier. And one thing that, yeah, AI can do a lot of amazing things, right? But one thing it can't do is take you through the creative process. Like you grow while you're in that process. If you, from the conception of an idea to making it a reality is a growth process and a transformational process a lot of times. And when you feel empowered to go on that journey, you start feeling empowered to transform about anything you want to about your life, to create things, to create experiences, to create relationships, not just to create art, not just to create a better, um, report for your boss, but like to create a better workspace experience. Like if you feel empowered, you don't care if you're the leader of that team or not. You bring your ideas there because you know it's gonna be better for everybody, and people will be cool with that, and you're like, "Oh, wow." We limit ourselves in so many ways, um, because that's just the way things are. That's the way it's always been, and creativity says, "No, it can be any way you want it to be. How do you want it to be? Let's go make that happen." And you grow and become the person that can make that happen. And that's what our world, I believe, needs more of. We need to believe that what we imagine, that what we see, that can be better and we can make it better. We don't have to sit around and wait for somebody else to do that for us.
That reminds me, just the other day, my daughter, who's 15, she's doing art at school and amazing. Like, compared to me, I cannot even imagine getting to that level. The stuff she paints, it's almost like a photograph of the thing. And what's really interesting was she just finished a piece. And when we started talking about it, she started telling me all of the decisions she had made during the process. So she said, "Oh, Dad, look, I was going to do this, but then I decided to do this. And then I did this, but I wish I hadn't done that now. And I wish I had done it this way, that way." And what was clear to me was all of the learning that she'd had. Rather than her just present the end product to me and go, "There you go." There was this whole story behind it. And this really ties into, I think, what you're saying. When we often see these famous pictures that artists have painted and drawn, we just see the end product. I wish artists would somehow capture all of the decision making, all the dilemmas they went through to get to that point, because they probably scrapped a number of ideas before they settled on that one thing that we see, which is the polished product. So you're so right. Like it's this experience we go through, it's not always about getting it perfect and looking like the thing you're trying to paint. It's that whole human experience, which is, yeah, amazing how creativity can bring that out.
Yeah, and what you just said is, a lot of my clients tend to be creatives. They identify as creative in some way. They like to make things. And and a lot of them are neurodiverse. And that's where the executive function piece comes in, because to me, I want to help creative people fulfill those amazing, beautiful visions that they have, because I think they inspire us all to do that, right? Um, and if there's so much that happens in the process of being an artist, we have to regulate our emotions so that we're not so terrified of what we put out there, that we have the courage to create, right? That's why that saying is a thing. We have to have that courage to create, and we have to make all those decisions. We have to be able to calm ourselves down to make those decisions. We have to be able to prioritize. We have to be able to think long term and plan how this is going to happen. All of these things happen, but those functions live right beside your creativity, the frontal lobe, like it's all up here. So activate one and we can activate the other. And then those two bring it into fruition. And yeah, I think it's fascinating what we go through to make something a reality. And there's nothing, I think, more exhilarating to me. Like, it feels like a superpower, speaking of superpowers, right? Uh-huh.
And you mentioned at the start of the show that you were a teacher and you're an educator in that respect. Can you think of an example of where you use this approach to facilitate and educate, and you saw a huge transformation in somebody? Could you share any stories around that?
Um, I have so many stories of using art and creativity. One of the things that I'll say, so the way I taught art was as a teaching artist. So I did not, I started as an education major and I actually hated my courses and I dropped it and just focused on art. But I loved working in education. I loved kids. And so I found this whole world teaching artists in which you teach based off of your own artistic process. And I was often in schools, underserved areas, and I realized the importance of art very early on was its expression, like, and its ability for kids that are living in just complete chaos in some of these places, and to have a space where they could be calm and think and be with themselves and be with each other in a new way and express. And so one of a really fun activity we did is they just love to get messy. We all do. We forget that as adults. But I think my favorite projects were when we were getting so messy, and I think most kids would say the same thing. We had this one thing. I saw it. I don't know where I saw it anymore because this is before Pinterest and all that stuff. But the salad spinners. A salad, like you cut your lettuce up to get the I went to, like, a cheap dollar store, and I got a ton of them. And you put paper plates in the bottom of them, and you squirt paint in, and you spin, and you spin, and you spin, and you spin. And then, like, of course, they did that all day. We made a huge mess, and then they pulled these things out. And so we're kinda there's doodling could be not just a line, it could be playing, with the artistic form. So then we pulled these plates out, and we just sort of doodled with our scissors, like, cutting them into shapes, and then just putting them together in this big collage as a group together, And, like, does it look good here? Because you could move it around and change it and play, and that I'm not saying the outcome, this is why I love doodling, the outcome wasn't the most important part. It was fun, it was colorful, it wasn't a masterpiece, but that process lit everybody up. Allowing ourselves to be in the mess and play and not need it to be perfect is just a relief, and we need more permission like that. I just would see these kids with so much heaviness around them and their eyes just light, like they're kids again. And I'm like, we all just want to light up and be kids again, don't we?
Yes, for sure. For sure. So, Karen, I'm going to ask you one of my favorite questions, which I always save till the end. And I didn't give you any warning of the questions. So, if I could give you any superpower to abolish something in the world of work, so that's something that really grinds you, what would that be? And we're going to do this for 24 hours. So, just in case it doesn't work.
Oh, like we're abolishing it for 24 hours to see what happens? Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Cool. Oh, this might sound silly at first, but I think our environment makes a huge impact on us and can inspire us or make us feel pretty oppressed. And can we just do away with the grays and the blacks and the whites only in a work environment or any work environment? Um, and I don't know, sort of the lack of color. I don't know if that's a what you're looking for, but to me, when I envision my work and when I get to do my work, the vision that drives me is this idea that we could walk into any office and it would look like a school in some way with like things on the wall, things we're proud of. Could be a little messy. It doesn't have to be all put together. It could be colorful and have energy that inspires us through the day. I mean, you said my background at the beginning, right? Like my environment, it it affects me. It affects how I feel and affects my creativity. And I want to have things around me that call to me and give me ideas and, connect me with the fact that I'm human and therefore we can connect with each other in our humanness as well. So maybe that's the deeper thing, within that is this, like, disconnect to our human nature, which is a little bit more messy and much more colorful and playful.
I think that's a great one, by the way. And I did a talk with a good friend of mine recently about facilitating online versus facilitating in person. And we came across some research that was super interesting where it was a study by a couple of university professors, I think at the University of Columbia and Stanford. And what they found was when they got a group of 600 volunteers to get creative and start brainstorming ideas, the groups that worked on the problem face to face, they produced on average 20% more ideas than their virtual counterparts. And not only that, their best idea was typically better than the online groups. And one of the reasons they put this down to that there's a whole host of reasons, but one of them was the environment and the fact that if we're trying to get creative and all we've got is this window in front of us, which is the computer screen, and we don't spend much time looking around us, and if our environment around us isn't that interesting, then that seriously hinders creativity. So when we have those creative spaces, there are so many connections the brain is making with our surroundings and environment. So I think that's such a great one. We're absolutely onto that.
And I think, as a facilitator, whenever I'm doing anything in person, I'm showing up so early because I'm changing that room. Like, it is not going to be the same room that like, if it's a boardroom, it's changing, but it's our conference room, it's changing so that it looks different when you come in so that you have a different experience. There's so many things that we can do that are small like that to make ourselves think more creatively. I'm never are we sitting in rows. I mean, I hate that. I go teach sometimes at community programs, it's through the university, a community program, and I walk in and it's like tables with, in these rows, and I'm like, just remember our like section where I'm putting tablecloths on top of things that are colorful. Like we need that. We're
Yeah,
affected by that.
love it. And Karen, just before we wrap up, how can people get in touch with you and what are some of the ways in which they can find your work?
Yeah. Howdoodle.com is my coaching and teaching website. And then I'm also on Substack. I have a free Substack called doodlediary.substack.com. And that you'll see more of my multi-creativeness pop out. You'll see my own artwork. You'll see my coaching work. You'll see my workshops, my events, all that stuff on there. And then I'm on LinkedIn too. You can always find me there, Karen Light.
Oh, brilliant. I'm going to check out your Substack because I'm on Substack as well. So we'll
Yay, I love Substack.
have a connection on there. Brilliant. Well, Karen, it's been such a pleasure getting to know you. And we talked about one of my favorite topics ever. So really appreciate all of your advice.
Yeah.
Love the doodling. And yeah, I just want to thank you for all your insights today.
Thank you. This has been such a fun, energizing conversation. I am ready for the rest of my day because it's early here. So
Oh.
I'm jazzed.
It's the end of another episode. Thank you so much for listening. Please do connect with me via LinkedIn and drop me a message and let me know your favorite takeaways from the episode. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Superpower School newsletter so that you can be notified of all future episodes. Simply visit the website www.superpowers.school. Thank you once again.